Rees Mogg now. 0345 6060 973. This is LBC.
Yeah, good morning. 4 minutes after 9 on Monday, June the 11th, and it is Ring Rees Mogg with Jacob Rees Mogg in the studio with me. Just before we come to some of those calls, can I just a couple of questions to you? Many people, even perhaps some of your most fervent supporters, Mr. Rees Mogg, might have had their doubts last week. It would appear that a series of circumstances, not least the altercation that might or might not have happened between David Davis and the Prime Minister, what Boris Johnson did say, as was recorded at a private lunch, I hasten to add a private lunch, might give cause for concern for Brexiteers. How should they react to last week's events? Good morning.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here again. Thank you. I think people should be calm that inevitably in this negotiation and in this process, people sometimes get frustrated. And the backstop deal is a problem, that it depends what is in it and it depends on the time limit. But what really matters is the withdrawal bill that's going through Parliament this week. And very importantly, an article jointly authored by Amber Rudney and Duncan Smith, saying basically, if you don't vote for this, you risk getting Jeremy Corbyn, and that there are further discussions to have on how we leave, but this is just bringing in the decision to leave. And there's quite a degree of unity within the Conservative Party at the moment. So I'm optimistic about what's happening. I think it's going slowly in the right direction, more slowly than I would like, but still in the right direction.
How necessary is a backstop?
I don't think a backstop ought to be necessary, and it's crucial that any backstop that is devised is not the front stop. It mustn't be so attractive to the EU that the EU say, well, that's fine, we'll just stick with that. And being in the customs union for an extended period is still effectively being in the European Union. So we won't have implemented the result of the referendum.
Was Mr. Davis right to insist on a date, then, for the cessation of a backstop?
I think a date has to be in there. There's no backstop that can be agreed without a final end point. But it's been rejected by the European Union
yes, I was
anyway.
going to say, yes.
So I think the key to this is that we shouldn't get over-exercised by negotiating documents when the other side hasn't even responded, because you have a great row about something and the EU says, well, actually, it doesn't matter what that document says, we don't like it. And we need to just be a little bit more patient as these negotiations go on.
I'm sure you've already heard this, but just to remind some of my listeners, this was, again, he didn't realise he was being taped, or at least we understand, Foreign Secretary last week.
Imagine Trump doing Brexit. What would he do? All sorts of breakdowns, there'd be all sorts of chaos. Everyone think he'd gone mad, but actually, you might get something.
A touch of the Trumps, Jacob Rees Mogg. Is that what we should employ, Britain should employ?
I think that Donald Trump has turned out to be a surprisingly effective negotiator from the American point of view. He seems to have succeeded in his discussions with China. He will be having discussions with Kim Jong-un, which nobody thought were possible a few months ago, and no previous president seemed at all likely to achieve. There is something in the Trump style that is very successful. The question is, would that be something the British Prime Minister could realistically do? And I think the personality types of Donald Trump and Theresa May are so different that to expect Mrs. May to become Mr. Trump is unrealistic.
Could David Davis do a Trump impersonation?
I think there are very few people who could do Donald Trump impersonations, and actually it needs to be real, it needs to be how you are, because if you throw your weight around and it appears to be a bluff, it appears to be a negotiating tactic, that's very unconvincing. The strength of Donald Trump's position is that when he says things that are really quite surprising, it looks as if he means them. And that's much more powerful, because that makes people think, good heavens, he's going to do X, Y, or Z, and therefore we must respond.
So, but coming back to Boris Johnson's, what would appear to be his central point, the idea, OK, I hear what you say, it's probably not in Mrs. May's makeup, neither in David Davis's makeup, but a touch of the Trumps in that we actually become a little bolder in our positioning.
Well, I think the Prime Minister's position in the negotiations will be considerably strengthened by the withdrawal bill passing through Parliament and becoming an act. I think there are still people in Brussels and in the UK who think that we're not really going to leave. A number in the House of Lords, and people who went over to speak to Barnier and try and encourage him to slow things down, not do too much, and then perhaps if we get bogged down in the detail, we might not really leave. Once the withdrawal bill is through, the Prime Minister can say, look, we really are leaving. It's now in our domestic law and it's in EU law. So let's talk seriously about what our future relationship is going to be like and how we leave this organisation.
And lastly, do I take it you're a bit of a fan of Donald Trump then? Is that fair?
I think Donald Trump is an interesting American president. And I think it's in the UK's interest, the overwhelming UK national interest, to get on with Donald Trump.
Are you a fan, Mr. Rees Mogg?
A fan would probably be putting it a little bit too strongly.
But there's something in his style you like.
No, he's successful so far.
Can he have a
his
Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, they've given that to all sorts of funny people. I can't really think why everyone gets so excited by a Nobel Peace Prize that's given people who either have been terrorists in the past or seem then to allow human rights abuses in the future. I wouldn't get excited by that. But his tax reforms are very exciting and interesting, and to see how those work out is very important.
Ring Rees Mogg, so let's get those calls in. Anthony in Birmingham, you're on the radio. Go ahead, Anthony. Good morning.
Good morning, both.
Good morning.
Good morning there. Good morning. Brexit is the most important issue of our time and one of the most important in our nation's history. Therefore, isn't it undemocratic and frankly absurd not to agree to give the people a vote on the terms of the deal?
Well, Anthony, people have had a vote, and they voted to leave.
Well, not the terms of the deal, many would argue.
But they had a vote, 17.4 million people, the biggest exercise in British democratic history, to leave the European Union. And if you give people a second vote, what is that vote going to be about? Is it going to be that you accept the deal or leave without a deal? Or is it going to be that you accept the deal or remain within the European Union? Or is it a three-way vote with each option? And then does one option have to get a 50% margin to win, or is it the option that gets the highest majority, or highest number of votes?
Isn't the reality there the danger that I might like what you're doing as regards Northern Ireland, but I don't like what you're doing as regards sovereignty, so how do I vote on a deal that's multifaceted? It's not a yes or no deal, is it, if you know what I'm saying?
That's true. It would be a multifaceted deal, and you would have to offer people the option of leaving without a deal as well as rejoining. It becomes a completely different discussion. And it's worth bearing in mind that there have in fact been 3 votes on the referendum. First of all, the Conservatives had it in their 2015 manifesto saying there would be a referendum, the choice be given to the British people. Then there was the referendum itself. And then at the last election, both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party said they would respect the referendum result. And that's the 3rd vote. So it's quite clear that people have voted to support leaving the European Union. And of course, as we discussed a fortnight ago, at some date in the next generation, in 30 years, people may decide to rejoin. But what's happening now is the implementation of a decision the British people made. And it's slightly, to my mind, contemptuous of democracy to say, well, actually, we don't like the result, so you'll vote again. And then you'll vote again until you do what we say. That's been the European Union's approach too many times.
Anthony, a response?
Well, first off, I would say that the Conservative Party, or the right-wing fringes of it, have been undermining the European Union ever since the Conservative Party took us into Europe in the early 1970s, right? So, in fact, if you don't like us challenging, I would say that we actually learned from yourself. But just coming back on why it is important, the reality is the government has failed to provide the British people with a compelling vision on Brexit. Meanwhile, the opposition has failed to fully hold the government to account. The Lords is being undermined by both the government and the leaders of the opposition, and certainly the government and Parliament in general is failing to heal the divides. And so, to my mind, government and Parliament has failed. The divisions within and between the parties compound the failures further. And put simply, Brexit can't be resolved with the minority government that we have in place.
Let's get some views.
Well, Anthony, I would encourage you to stand for election because you think none of us are doing it very well, and therefore we need people like you to put your head above the parapet and see if you can get a mandate from the British people to do what you want. That's the answer.
Where is the picture of the sunny up plans? It is a little bit head in hands, isn't it, our negotiating position too often, Mr. Rees Mogg?
I think, Ms. Ferrari, you're looking at 2 different things. One is the nitty-gritty of the negotiations. And negotiations are always slightly like watching paint dry. They're not going to be an exciting one-day international where Scotland defeat England having scored 371 runs.
Exciting. I call that absolutely shameful, but there we are.
Yes. But there is the opportunity once we've left, and that is really exciting, and lots of people have talked about that, the opportunity for cheaper food, clothing and footwear, the opportunity to make trade deals across the world.
Why isn't that being boasted? Why are we hearing that from the rooftops? Why isn't Mrs May talking about that and David Davis rather than fighting all the time?
They have mentioned it in their various speeches, but perhaps people find the fighting more exciting in the short term than talking about the broad side of it. Of course I'm not blaming the media. I think the media does a wonderful job, and a free media is essential to our democracy.
Thank you, Anthony. Andrew in Dorchester, lovely part of the world. Andrew, go ahead. Good morning.
Morning, Nick.
Morning, Andrew.
Hi. First of all, brilliant synopsis on President Trump that you said. Totally agree, and I think there are millions actually in Britain who quietly also agree with you. But obviously we don't want to talk about that because it's against the usual rhetoric. However, regarding the events coming up this week in the House of Commons, with IDS and Amber Rudd calling for unity yesterday,
Yes.
What is the real likelihood? I mean, the danger here very clearly is about Labour getting in, and if anything fails, then they would fall. But what we need is total unity. Is it really likely going to happen this week?
Well, Andrew, there won't be total unity. There never is. And you can't really expect somebody like Ken Clarke, who's devoted his political life to supporting the ideal of the European Union, to suddenly say that he's changed his mind. I don't think that's reasonable, and I think his position is a completely defendable one. I wouldn't expect him to abandon his views simply for party advantage. He believes this very strongly, and I'm in favour of people believing in things and having strong principles in politics. Having said that, I think there is a recognition within the Conservative Party that there was a referendum and an election manifesto that committed us to leaving, that the Prime Minister has widespread support within the party, and that putting the bill through strengthens her position. And that's important not just in terms of the negotiations, but also in terms of keeping Jeremy Corbyn out, that it would be foolish to put this at risk when the opinion polls currently have the Conservatives well ahead of the Labour Party. And so I think there will be some unity this week. It won't be perfect, but it ought to be enough to get the bill through and to reinforce the strength of Theresa May's position.
Andrew, a response?
I think that's extremely well said. I think that sounds about right. And the fact is, there might be 5 or 6 Labour MPs who are going to come over anyway, one would hope. But I think many people are hoping for the same, and common sense prevails.
Quick response from you to wrap that up.
Well, Andrew, I think that's right. And Caroline Flint has been very impressive on this in saying that she recognises what people have voted for as a Remainer, though I probably oughtn't to praise her because she's already been compared to me by Chris Leslie, which is probably the worst insult that could ever have been thrown at her, so I feel rather guilty mentioning her again.
Can I get you on thank you for that, Andrew. Can I get you on another matter? As we speak, there is a ship on the high seas, the Aquarius. The crew of the rescue ship pulled 229 migrants from the water or from traffickers' unseaworthy boats, including 123 unaccompanied children and 7 pregnant women, reports one of our national newspapers today. And now there seems to be both Italy and Malta refusing to take this ship Aquarius, despite the fact that there are some pregnant women on board. Jacob Rees Mogg.
The new Italian government has made it very clear that it's not going to run with the immigration policy that has been there in the past. And this is one of those very difficult issues because of the law of unintended consequences that people have been putting to sea in unseaworthy boats.
I mean, in total, there's over 600. There's about 640 people on this boat now.
They've been putting to sea in leaky boats because the people traffickers know that they will then get picked up and they will get taken immediately to a European country. And what ought actually to happen is that they ought to go back to where they started, and that they ought to be looked.
You would turn Aquarius back.
I think the problem, and this has led to deaths. I mean, this is really serious. People have drowned in large numbers in the Mediterranean because the people traffickers have felt that they just push people out into the sea as soon as they're into international waters. Instead of being taken back to where they came from, they get into the European Union. Once in the European Union, they can go anywhere. And I think this policy has been really dangerous, actually, and has sacrificed lives. And it would have been better to try and create safe areas under UN control or something like that, to ensure that people go back to the countries that they've come from and be looked after there, rather than giving them automatic entry into the EU.
So these 630, 640 souls, the boat turns round, takes them back to Libya.
Assuming Libya, but they need to be looked after once they're in Libya.
Right.
And the UK...
So you have a UN humanitarian camp. I see.
And the UK is spending more money than any nation other than the US in refugee camps around Syria, to look after people near where they've come from, rather than making it an international refugee policy problem. And I've always thought that's the right policy. I think it achieves the best humanitarian outcome.
And just a brief word on how the political landscape has changed in Italy, which is what has really brought about the fact that Italy haven't welcomed these 630-plus people.
Well, it's fascinating. The Italians have got rather fed up with being a satrapy of the European Union and think that they should start doing things for themselves.
And we will see more of that across Europe?
We'll see more of that. The difficulty, of course, is that other countries have tried this before. Greece had a shot at disobeying the European Union and had their government forced into line. So what was it? Over 60% of people voted against austerity in a referendum in Greece. And then the government introduced an even more austere austerity programme because the European Union told it had to. So the European Union's contempt for democracy is an important factor to bear in the back of one's mind.
Nathaniel in Dover, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead, Nathaniel. Morning.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Jacob.
Morning, Nathaniel.
Morning. So I obviously live on quite a perilous border with oncoming Brexit. I want to know when the government are going to start taking the problems we face seriously down here.
Would you want to just, for my listeners who aren't familiar with the problems in Dover, what do you mean by the problems, Nathaniel?
So let's say the potential outcome means that we're going to have to do checks this side of the border. There isn't any plans in place. There isn't anything in place to deal with all the lorries what are going to be coming down into my town.
This is the idea, of course, that effectively day one, or certainly by day two, Dover is a lorry park or a car park, effectively, isn't it, is what some are saying.
Operation Stack on Steroids is what it's been dubbed down here.
Right.
But there's nothing being done, and I want to know when the government are actually going to look down here and actually deal with it.
Well, OK, stay on the line. But remind you, Mr. Rees-Mogg's not a member of the government yet, but he can certainly talk about the Conservative Party.
Indeed, and thank you for calling, Nathaniel. And the issues in Dover are obviously important and have been raised regularly by Charles Elphick, the MP for Dover. The government has got plans in place, and there are two sides of this. One is goods coming in. Goods coming in will be under our control, so there will be no need to have any delays in goods coming in from the continent in the event that we leave without a deal, because goods that are safe on the 29th of March will be safe on the 30th of March. And that means that inbound traffic ought not to suffer any delays because it will be our choice.
But Stack on Steroids rather indicates going the other way, going out of the UK.
The issue is with lorries going back. Now, a third of lorries going back are actually empty because we import more from the EU than it does from us. The third of the lorries going back empty ought not to be delayed because they've got nothing to declare. It's just the lorry going back. The two-thirds that have goods may be subject to delays, and the government does indeed have a plan for that. And the Department of Transport is one of the few departments that has actually done a lot of work to be ready for no deal. And it's
so we'll have checks at Dover.
No, we won't have checks at Dover. That's a customs excise responsibility. Right. There'll be no need for checks at Dover, but it will be an ability to ensure that the roads keep running around Dover, even if there are delays at Calais. The delays will not be at Dover, they will be at Calais. That could have a knock-on effect.
Sorry, Calais going in or Calais...
Calais going in.
Well, that means I can't get on the boat.
That's where you need Operation Stack.
So he's right. Let's go back to Nathaniel.
There will be, if we leave without a deal, and the French say your goods can't come in via Calais...
Which is highly likely.
Which is possible, but then there are other ports, and Rotterdam and Antwerp have been increasing their infrastructure and taking on more customs.
So instead of an hour and a half, we've got to sail all the way around to Rotterdam.
Well, there are competitive issues, inevitably. But yes, there is a plan in place, but yes, it is...
Well, let's go to Dover. Nathaniel, your reaction?
So I'm a bit perplexed by the fact of no checks at Dover. There are already checks at Dover. We have a customs clearance yard down here for non-EU vehicles. So there will be checks down at Dover. I grew up in the haulage industry. At the Swiss border, it took us 45 minutes to clear customs with just, for example, hay on the back of a lorry. So to say there's not going to be checks is disingenuous. And
no, it isn't. I'm sorry, there'll be no change to non-EU checks. I was talking about EU checks, and EU checks will be under our control. And we may decide to introduce checks in due course.
Yes.
But there would be absolutely no need to do it immediately we had left.
It's what Pierre is doing in Calais that is the problem, isn't it, or whatever his or her name may be. Because if they decided to go through, and we know the French, they are a funny race at times, if they decide to go through everything, the queue it'll be past Leicester Square.
No, we're past Leicester
Might get
Square.
to Somerset.
I don't think we should get too overexcited about this. There may be a need for an operation stack of a short-term nature, as there has been in the past when they've been on strike.
Why short term?
Why short-term?
Because if France wants to be intransigent, it won't just do it overnight.
Because we will come to some deal on trade at some point, or we'll trade under WTO
Which
terms.
means they can stop us getting into Calais with all these
But
trucks.
it is in everybody's interest to trade efficiently. The average time for something to go through Switzerland, to get into Switzerland,
Mr.
is
Rees
20
Mogg,
minutes. The average time for transition through Switzerland, if you're not actually stopping in Switzerland, is 2.5 minutes. So if Calais introduces a normal WTO-style inspection regime, at Southampton, goods come in and they are cleared as they are lifted from the boat and put on the dock.
This is getting into... And you know the French, when the air traffic controllers love to pick bank holidays or the start of a summer holiday period. They can be pretty intransigent, the French, les bleus.
And then Calais will find that it simply does less business. And other routes will be used, and they may be longer, but they will be used instead.
It'll be more expensive as well, won't it, for the hauliers?
But the cost of the sea travel is one of the lowest costs.
But if I've got to take all my trucks
total
through Rotterdam, for argument, instead of Calais, it's going to cost me more for my haulage company.
But these are marginal costs. These aren't going to make a fundamental difference.
Final word from Nathaniel on this. Nathaniel? I think we've lost you. Nathaniel, final call? We've lost you, we move on. Rufus in Eastbourne, staying on the coast. Anyway, Rufus, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Hello. I think the country benefits from having a larger government budget for infrastructure and services. So do you think the UK would benefit from having 1 million more people each year who can contribute their skills and taxes?
Jacob Rees Mogg.
I think 1 million people more each year would be a very large number and would be a significant burden on our existing infrastructure. That the infrastructure needs to be in place, Rufus, before you have the 1 million extra people, don't you think?
Rufus.
Well, it has to be done both at the same time. I see a number of people here who are entrepreneurs, who've set up businesses. There's a Greek person set up a company with 7 Polish people running it day to day. They pay their taxes and they contribute, and I think they're of great benefit to the economy.
Immigration does have economic benefits, or can do, depending on the type of immigration. The least economically beneficial is low-skilled, low-wage immigration, which has been a very high proportion of the total EU labour movement. So I think it's hard to argue that that has been so beneficial. And 1 million people a year would be a huge strain on our existing infrastructure, that's schools, hospitals, which you can't build in the year that the 1 million people arrive. It takes time to find the money, it takes time to get the planning permission, it takes time to find the builders and the architects and get everything done. So I think to move to an immigration system of 1 million people a year would be a mistake.
Thank you for that. A couple of email questions. One from Marion in Dublin. What is the solution to the border problems? I'm sure you mean the border between the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland. Jacob Rees Mogg.
Well, I'm with Boris on this. I think Boris got it right, that the tail is wagging the dog, and that it's always been very straightforward. That with the border, ultimately we say to them, we're not imposing a border, what are you going to do? And if
this is Trumpian again, though, isn't it? Or rather Trump view it all, really.
Well, perhaps it is, but once we've left the European Union, we are not obliged to follow European Union rules and regulations and European Union law. And so we should leave it to them and see what they do. And my guess is that the Irish government would be most unwilling to put a manned border across the island of Ireland. It would be against what Irish governments have stood for since there have been independent Irish governments.
Casper in Loughborough, what hopes does Jacob Rees Mogg have coming out of the summit in Singapore?
Oh, that's very interesting, Casper. It's very hard to know because you have got 2 of the most unpredictable political figures in the world discussing things with each other. And I don't know what will happen, obviously. I think it is a good thing that they're meeting. I doubt either side will get everything that it wants. But I do think it's interesting that Trump, by behaving in a very tough way, and in a way that was heavily criticised when he started behaving this way, has managed to get Kim Jong-un to the negotiating table in a way that none of his predecessors could. All of his predecessors basically took the view that Kim Jong-un and his father Kim Jong-il before him were too difficult to deal with, and you'd apply a few sanctions, but you couldn't really do anything about it. And Trump's changed that. He's put pressure on China, he's put pressure on North Korea, and something is happening.
Did you have any sympathy for him? A photograph... You're right, do you need some
Yeah,
more?
no,
Okay.
I've got some.
A photograph in today's newspapers. He seems to be being hectored or lectured by Angela Merkel. Justin Trudeau is getting in on the act. Emmanuel Macron. We can't quite see Mrs May's body language, but he seems to be getting quite a ticking off.
I thought that picture was quite extraordinary. There is the most powerful man in the world being told off by at least 5, because fortunately you can't see our Prime Minister, she's wiser than to be doing this, 5 people who are significantly less powerful. And does the President of the United States lose too much sleep about what Monsieur Trudeau thinks? I very much doubt it. And that the reality of power diplomacy is that America has it and Canada doesn't. And Canada trying to punch above its weight does not help Canada, and it's where the UK should learn from this. We need to be close to the United States. It is in our interest. And what we should do is focus on the things that matter to us and where we may have some influence. Because if we just fire off at Donald Trump with the usual liberal international platitudes, that will not impress him, and it will make it harder for us to do things that we want to do with him.
How much time do you have for Justin Trudeau?
Well, I'm not a Canadian. I don't have a vote in Canadian elections. But perhaps he could be Governor of the Bank of England, because his competition seems to have that post at the moment.
Final call. Pauline in Edmonton. Now, we're going to be talking about this in a moment's time. Your question, and your call to Jacob Rees Mogg. Pauline, go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Rees Mogg.
Hello, Pauline.
I wanted to ask whether any of your children is addicted to computer games, and if not, how do you prevent them being so?
This as a game. Are you familiar with a game called Fortnite, Mr. Rees Mogg?
I'm not familiar with a game called Fortnite.
Remind me the ages of your children. The oldest.
The eldest is 10 and the youngest is 11 months.
Yes, well,
so the 11-month-old one is
10-year-old could be involved in something called Fortnite.
But isn't. I mean,
do you limit the amount of time he's allowed?
Well, my 7-year-old and my 6-year-old, about to be 6-year-old, 8-year-old, he's just been 8. Good heavens, I get into trouble for getting that wrong. And my 8-year-old and about to be 6-year-old, the first thing they say to me in the mornings in Somerset is, can I have a go on the iPad? And I'm trying to train them to say, good morning, first. And I give them half an hour. Actually, I give them 31 minutes. They get an extra minute to give them time to find the thing that they want. And then an alarm goes off and they stop. And that works as well as anything.
Yes.
But I'd be loath to tell people how to
What about the
bring up their
10-year-old?
children. The 10-year-old isn't so interested.
Oh, right. Okay.
Hasn't got hooked on that.
Are you speaking from person? Pauline, back to you. Do you have problems with a child or a grandchild on Fortnite?
No, I just thought that since Mr. Rees Mogg has got 6 children,
yes.
I wondered what his experience of this is.
Well, there we are. It's a strict time limit.
It's a time limit. I'm not that strict. They may get another go later in the day, but they get
if they ask nicely. No, this Fortnite, be aware of it. There's a child, a 9-year-old, who was so addicted she would soil herself rather than break off from the game.
Oh, I heard about that, yes.
It's quite incredible, this game. It's a hold, so well done. Perhaps 32 minutes, but make sure that you limit it. Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Great
Jacob
pleasure.
Rees Mogg appearing here on LBC when news is next.